Good afternoon, everybody. To those of you in California, happy late morning. To those of you who are joining us from Europe, we have some. Hope you're having a good evening. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. We know you have very busy schedules, so we really appreciate you carving out 50 minutes or so of your time to join us for it. A little bit about Orthogonal. Orthogonal is here to improve patient outcomes faster. The way we do it is by accelerating the development of software as a medical device, connected medical device systems, and digital therapeutics. And the way that we do that acceleration is by fusing modern product management and software development methods and tooling with a focus on change control, quality, and safety that's crucial to medical devices. This is part of a series that we're calling the Move Faster and Break Nothing series as a counter to the expression, we will move fast and break things with our software. In the medical device world, we like to say, or at least at our firm, we like to say, we will move faster and break nothing. This has been a series of webinars we've been doing over the course of 2022, really talking about the different dimensions of how you can accelerate SaMD development so you can get better software out sooner with good quality and safety. We're really excited for today's webinar because we're sharing really a key piece of the puzzle of the different dimensions of this this is a piece we've been working on for years. Title for today's session is eQMS, Maintaining SaMD Compliance at Agile Speeds. And our goal for you today is to kind of share our point of view on the question of what does a modern Agile eQMS look like? And what does that mean when you have a eQMS that's an accelerator on your development process and on your quality, as opposed to an overhead or a drag? And we want to share with you some of the lessons learned. So over the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to try and pack maybe 2.5 hours of content in. You can tell us how well we succeed with that. And our promise to you is we will be done in about 50 minutes. We'll have hopefully answered a couple questions. So you can leave then if you want. However, it's sort of become our practice. We will stay on a full 90 minutes for this webinar. So we'll stay on till 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, or as long as there's questions really until that. We usually find that there's a number of people who have more questions. So we're happy to keep the conversation going. And frankly, for that matter, if there's a ton of questions we don't get to, sometimes we'll schedule a follow-up webinar on this. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Bernhard CAPA, Orthogonal's founder and CEO, to give you a overview on this topic. But I do want to mention one quick thing, which is I just found out, very disappointed, I just found out that Melissa Gill is presenting next, was an employee who was there to open up the very first Apple store 001, 20 years ago in California. She was there when, like, wearing the shirt, I guess, when Steve Jobs came in to give like the pep talk to everybody. And I'm just learning this now. I think it's like the coolest thing ever. And I'm going to use that in every intro I ever give for her moving forward. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bernhard and Melissa. Thank you.
So let's set some context, right? SaMD and connected device systems are both software and medical device. So what does that mean? If we think about software, right, on the software side, software is eating the world. You've got a combination of sensors, connectivity, mobile and cloud. It's getting more pervasive, more powerful, and evolving ever faster. And for software, you've got to deal with fast change. You can change the software faster, but the software you rely on may change too, right? Distribution is much faster as well. It can be almost instantaneous. You get feedback and data on performance, outcomes, anything you can imagine, much faster and cheaper as well. But you're also in this environment not fully in control. You don't control the cloud, you don't control the BYOD, you don't control the internet and the Verizons and AT&Ts of the world. So that's very different than traditional hardware, right? On the hardware side, we've got patient risk, we've got medical efficacy, we've got regulatory standards we have to deal with, quality management, design controls, and all of this stuff was originally hardware centric, which moved much, much slower. So software developers have adapted to all the challenges and opportunities for software that we listed before, right? Agile methods are the result. They've proven to be a better way of making software in the modern world. They're specifically designed for change and uncertainty. and they're based on small increments of build, measure, learn loops that let you make many adjustments as you learn along the way. They leverage automation to make everything faster, builds, testing, distribution, rollbacks, et cetera, and they take real-time data to monitor and make adjustments. This really results in more robust, more resilient, more useful, and more adaptable software delivered faster and cheaper. It's really a better way of making software than was available previously. Now we go on to the medical device side, and the circumstances for medical device quality systems and regulations, how those evolved, they revolved around hardware first and foremost. As we know, hardware is not as fast to change or distribute. You've got manufacturing processes, you have distribution, you've got to ship it, install it, etc. And the regulations and standards all started well before software was as important, and before agile methods were developed, and before the Internet of Everything that we are in right now started happening. So as a result, all of these regulations were written in a waterfall way. They were executed in a waterfall manner, and that is a legacy that is built up in all of these processes, and really the training around that and how people have historically done it. So the consequences of that when you are dealing with SAMD is when you bring those two things together, you end up with an impedance mismatch. Even if the development is agile, if the other processes necessary for creating value for medical devices, regulatory compliance, design controls, risk management, et cetera, are not agile, then you're not going to get the benefits of agile. You're really going to end up with the worst of both worlds. Less value from agile, less adaptation from to change, lots of extra work, frustrated developers, frustrated and overwhelmed quality and regulatory folks, and for really little to no gain, little improvement in safety, compliance, and outcomes. It doesn't have to be that way, however, right? Now, the regulations and standards don't prevent you from adopting agile methods. They just don't make it obvious, right? They were written that way, but then there's lots of appendices and various documents and other things that have been written and indicated that yes, you can use agile methods. For example, the FDA adopting AMI TIR 45 as a consensus standard way back in 2013. There are standards and guidance documents that provide helpful patterns that you can leverage, but it's up to you to pull those together. So software segregation in IEC 62304, agile methods in TIR 45, the various cybersecurity guidances and standards that are out there are really designed much more for the modern world. The SAMD working model, even though it's not really in force, has great stuff in it, and guidance around interoperability, around multiple function guidance, the AMI Cloud Consensus Report, and then upcoming AMI TIR on cloud computing are very helpful in this way. And then there's draft guidance from the FDA on good machine learning practices, and then a position paper which kind of ties all of these things together, also not in force, but good patterns that you can draw from that. Ultimately, the key to making these things work together is not to make agile development less agile. It is to make the non-development activities more agile. So over time, we and other folks in the industry have developed kind of what I'd call an SAMD toolbox. It's really a toolbox for getting the best of both worlds for SAMD. So there's a bunch of processes that are part of that: agile planning, agile risk management, patterns like software segregation and defining and managing residual risk for modules and external dependencies, tools to automate like product analytics, automated change lifecycle, and then people that are trained in agile methods and fast feedback loops to apply those patterns, leverage the tools, and execute the processes. The thing we're going to talk about today is really one of the key building blocks to making all of this work seamlessly, which is the tooling for eQMS and ALM, PLM. So we started our process for how we would apply this like a lot of other folks, right? We had a document-centric quality management system for managing requirements, specifications, risk management, verification, traceability, SOPs, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, our developers and product managers and QA folks were working in Jira, Confluence, and GitHub in a normal software development method. There's not a whole lot of synergy between those processes, we felt. People weren't really looking at or working on the same things in the same environment. And the results, we had documentation for documentation's sake. There was a lot of wasted effort, longer timelines, all of those impedance mismatch things were there. And we knew better that this wasn't the way that it really should be or needed to be. Where we wanted to go was to get really the whole team working within one system where modular design and agile practices could be extended to design control activities. We wanted minimal developer disruption, let the developers develop and work in the tools that they're used to. Integrated iterative work on requirements, architecture, design, risk management, V&V, and traceability, visible to everyone and related to the development work that was going on. And then documentation as an automated output of the work being done rather than extra work to generate documentation. And we were hoping for increased quality, reduced costs and duration of the design controls part of the overall process. With that, I'll turn it over to Melissa, who's going to talk a little bit about kind of how we evaluated different solutions and then demonstrate what we ended up with that we are applying ourselves. And we're also applying for some of our clients.
Thank you, Bernhard. So we treated this like a project we were going to implement, and we defined a bunch of requirements we had for what our eQMS system needed to do for us, what functionality it needed to have, what sort of value we were looking to get out of the system. And we did a competitive analysis. We looked at a bunch of different options that were out there in the marketplace in terms of, eQMS tooling and offerings, other product offerings, separate systems from Jira and Confluence. And then we also did some research on what sort of tooling was available for Jira or Confluence or what integrations were available, since that is where our software teams were working and we didn't want to disrupt that process. So coming out of that evaluation process, there's a couple big things that we found about QMS tooling. If your software teams are working in Jira and that's where your software activity is happening, you either have the option of something that is built on Jira and Confluence that's working in that same system, or you have to integrate with some other system via Jira's APIs. And there's sometimes issues with that in terms of, data being managed in two systems, or it tends to lend to that sort of process where you do everything in Jira, you get to the end of your software development phase, you do some sort of big data transfer, and then you start going into a document generation phase. And that was some of the things that we're trying to look to get out of. And some of those integrations either don't run very often or still kind of get to that silo, that separation between what your software teams are doing and what your quality teams are doing because they're working in separate systems. So we found a series of add-ons for Jira and Confluence that allowed us to do what we wanted to do, meta requirements, and really facilitated that agile process, that ability to keep our software teams working where they were, and to incorporate that documentation more seamlessly into that work, incorporate it into our sprint iterations, and take advantage of that integration and the information that our teams are capturing in Jira to generate our documentation automatically. So what I'd like to do at this point is share my screen and do a demo of our eQMS tooling and how we're accomplishing that in Jira and Confluence with a number of add-ons, primarily from SoftComply and Kamala Document Management, which I believe is now owned by AppFire, that provide the functionality we needed to do what we need to do with software, but also do it in a compliant way, create the DHF documentation we needed, and to do that in a lightweight way. So we're starting out here in Jira with our Jira backlog that, very industry standard. A lot of software teams are working this way. And we've got our backlog with our user stories in there. But what we do is we add into our Jira projects, tracking those other things that we need to do for SaMD or medical devices. So we can track our risks right here in Jira. We can track all of our tests and our test case management. Our verifications are all connected into Jira, and those can be connected to your CI/CD system and automated tests and record those results back into Jira for you. And we also capture all of our requirements so we can establish our traceability. So we've created some user needs as well as system requirements or subsystem requirements as needed for your product to track all of that information in Jira. So for example, this is a demo project we put together that's just got some sample data, but we could have a user need that they want to view their treatment history in the application, or they want to share that treatment history with an HCP. And what we can do is then use the Jira issue links to associate all of these items together to establish our traceability. So I'm going to look at an example story. The sort of concept we're following here for our demo is a connected device where you've got an application on a smart device and it's connecting to a physical device through a Bluetooth connection. And when you're managing with that, you've got to deal with a lot of these edge cases around drop connections, user denying permissions. And so we've got a story in our backlog where we're going to implement handling a lost connection. So you can capture all of your typical user story information just like your team is doing in Jira today. And then we use those user stories to represent our software requirement specification in Jira. And as we scroll down a little bit here, we can see where all of that linkage and that traceability starts to come into play. So this particular story is fulfilling a system requirement we have that the app is going to guide the user through Bluetooth connection establishment. And we've got a test in our system that we're going to execute to demonstrate that when the Bluetooth connection is lost, we can handle it the way that we intend to do. And this story actually arrived through a risk that we identified in our product. If we lose connection to the device, maybe there's a potential patient harm. If we've got like a continuous glucose monitor or some sort of neurostimulator, if we lose connection to the device and our app is our method of controlling that device, then what could happen if the user doesn't have the ability to turn down a stimulation level or to manage a dosage? And so this is going to mitigate what we've identified through that risk of notifying the user or handling some activity in application that way. And we can see here that we can even record automatically our test results. So this was executed on a particular build and it passed, and we can see that status here. And so this starts to build out all of those elements, those items that we need to track, trace, those pieces of data that we then need to report on in our Jira system. And let me show you next what our traceability looks like, because that was a key piece for us. Instead of having to manually manage traceability tables in another system or in spreadsheets, or if you update or you add a new story, having to go in and manage your traceability in an onerous way, using all of those dynamic issue links, it's really easy to create those, link them together, and then generate the documentation off of them whenever you need. And so the tool we're using for that is an add-on called Requirements Management for Jira, or R4J. And all of these that we're demoing today are in Jira and Atlassian Cloud. A lot of these add-ons also have Jira Server or Data Center versions of that as well. And so what we're looking at here is a traceability matrix that I was able to build using those issue types we have in Jira and using those links to associate them to each other. So this is demonstrating that common traceability that we need to demonstrate for the DHF of taking a user need, tracing it to a system requirement, tracing it to a software subsystem requirement, and then tracing those requirements to the verifications that demonstrate those requirements have been met all the way up the chain. And this is fully customizable so that if you want to trace through as many different levels of hierarchy or associations, you are able to set those up as long as you can create an issue type and a link type for that, associate those two items together, and then you can build a traceability matrix from them. And then what this does, this is a great living document that your team can work off of right here in Jira as they're developing their product. It's going to automatically identify covers. So we can see here in our product, we've got some user needs that we haven't defined. We haven't defined requirements. We haven't defined software requirements. So that's a gap we need to fill in our product. It's really easy to see this automated that way. When I'm ready to generate my traceability report, all I need to do is export it. It's going to take a moment here and make a Excel file for me. And when I open that up, Wait for Excel to open itself. There we go. And so this is the traceability matrix that would be generated. That's a different download, actually. I apologize for that. Let me try to open the new one again. There we go. All right. And so this is our traceability matrix generated from our information in Jira, very standard Excel format that you can include in your submission package, and it's going to fulfill everything that you need to do. Another type of traceability is to being able to establish the traceability for your risks. And so we can do that really easily through here as well. So I can start with any risks that we have identified in our product, trace them to the mitigations that we've identified for those risks. And I need to trace those down to the verifications that will verify those mitigations have, properly mitigated those risks. So I can easily manage this by adding a coverage level, giving it a name. I'm going to base it off of my mitigations. I'm going to stay in my demo project, and I only want to show my test types because I'm showing tests verifying those mitigations. And I only want to use the tests issue type again, so I can scope it in exactly how I need to. I'm going to add this column, and it's going to automatically populate that with my verifications for my mitigations. And now I've got a completed risk traceability that I can export out from my DHF. If I add a new risk and I add a new mitigation for it, I don't have to come back and update this traceability matrix. It's going to automatically populate that based off of the data that's in my Jira project. With that, let me show you our risk manager that we're using. This is an add-on from SoftComply. Oops, it's telling me that I didn't save the change to my traceability matrix, which is fine for the case of our demo. But that's nice in case you don't hit the save button before you leave. All right, so there's two components to the risk manager add-on in Jira. The first is the risk matrix. And so this allows you to fully customize your risk matrix that is going to be used for your risk scoring in your project. It's got templates already built in as part of the add-on that you can choose from, and you can also customize it as much as you need. So in this scenario, let's say that I want to add a new risk class for my very worst catastrophic and frequent category on this matrix. And so I can come in and call it what I want. I can give it the color I want. I can add in this description. So this could be the definition of how I need to mitigate this classification or the qualifications for that will populate in the reporting for our risk matrix. So I'll add that real quick. So I've got a new risk scoring or risk class that I can choose from to apply to my matrix. I can come over to my matrix and say, I want to make this catastrophic frequent risk, use that new class. I can edit it. And now I've got it available to pick from a list, and I can apply that. And it's going to automatically rescore my risks that are in my risk register that fit that classification. It's now going to show them as extreme. I don't have to go manually make any updates. Let's take a look at the risk table itself. And so this is our risk register. This is going to list out for us all the risks that we've identified for our product. And it's going to do that in a pretty standard table format. Each one of these risks is an issue in Jira. So each of these items has any number of fields associated with it. So whatever you need to capture to manage and analyze risk for your project, if you need to capture some sort of aspect, you can create a field for it. In this example, we're using kind of a standard risk hazard analysis, but there's templates in there as well for different FMEA types, and you can also fully customize it. We also use this add-on to manage our cybersecurity risks. You can use it to manage project risks or other risk types as well that may not necessarily be ISO 14971 type of risks. But it's a really nice tool for risk management, whatever type that looks like. And so you can see in here, we've got our list of risks. The first thing is going to show us what our initial risk scoring is and then what we've mitigated it to, which is really handy for being able to manage the risk in your project and making sure that you've mitigated that risk appropriately. And you've got an acceptable product that you can release from a risk standpoint. So we identify our risks, we summarize them, we identify what type of risk they are, fill out our hazardous situation and harm for our standard hazard analysis type. And then we can do our risk analysis to give it a severity and a probability. And then based off of that risk matrix we saw, it's going to give us that score. So we can see right here on the first one, it's scoring it as extreme, even though I just added that category a couple minutes ago here. It's going to automatically rescore it based off of that, the assessments that we've done in the matrix that we're using. And then you can identify the mitigation actions, associate those to how the mitigations are going to be implemented, your verifications, and then ultimately give your risk a final severity and probability assessment, and then get that final risk scoring. Since each of these are an individual issue in Jira, you can either work with them through this risk matrix that's listing all of your risks together, which is really handy as you're analyzing, as often risks may have some similarities or relations to each other. And then you can open any of these and look at them as an issue type in Jira. We can see all those fields that are here that are part of our risk analysis. And then all of those linkages that are going to establish your traceability are there. The other item that we use in Jira to complete our Jira side of things with add-ons is an add-on for test management called X-Ray. X-Ray or Zephyr are pretty common in industry, even if you're not doing medical device, just for managing testing for software. And it allows you to organize all of your tests. You can group them into different folders and whatever organization structure you need. You can create test plans. You can create groups of tests. And then you can also record all of your test executions in there as well, with what build you ran it on, what environments you ran it on, and all of that associated information. And so what we're looking at here is just an example test that we've created in our system. And this can either be manual tests where you specify manual testing, or you can actually do these as gherkin syntax tests that you can feed out to Cucumber testing to integrate automatically with your automated testing in your CI/CD system. So this is just giving an example here of how we've written a sample test using that gherkin syntax. And then if that was connected to some automated tests that were instrumented, we could have some triggers built. So when we kick off a new build, we're going to run a certain batch of tests that maybe are simulating our build acceptance test plans, execute all those tests and have it automatically create test execution records in Jira that will show us all of that information and what tests passed or failed. Another great thing about X-Ray is it has a really powerful document generator tool. I'm not going to go into it too far today, but it does allow you the ability to add your own fully custom templates. If you need to export any information out of Jira, not just for the test issue types that you can use to generate documentation. So I'm just going to show a real quick example here of a test report. And what that is going to do for us is export all of our tests, including all of those protocol steps. So those gherkin syntax things that we were doing, so that we can establish basically our full protocol and include that in our DHF documentation. So here's my test report. It's going to list what all of my test plans and sets and my procedure documentation is. And then I can come down here and see, for example, my test and the procedure that's going to be tested when that test is executed. So as far as the Jira integration goes, you add a couple add-ons. You can either add them into your existing projects or you can add them into separate projects so that you can track all of your requirements, all of your risks, all of your tests and everything in Jira. And how you organize that, there's a bunch of different ways to do that. But as long as you're capturing all that information in Jira, that allows us to then take advantage of Confluence and using those Jira items to generate documentation automatically. So let me swap over to Confluence now. We use a number of add-ons in Confluence that allow us to do the things that we need to do around compliant signatures, compliant electronic signatures, generating documentation templates using our master document list. We also use Confluence to house all of our quality system records and all of our procedures and work instructions we use in our entire quality process. So what I'm showing here is an example of some DHF documentation that can be generated in Confluence, and this is an example master document list. And we're trying to take advantage of the tools features as much as we can to help automate things, make things easy to fill in information automatically so that you have less manual time working on documentation. When you have a new release, you can do a couple updates, you can verify information, and then do your approvals and get that documentation out. It also means that a lot of this information is living documents alongside the work that you're doing. So if you have something like a software requirement specification or the traceability that we saw in Jira, this is going to be automatically updated. If I added a new user story that was associated for my release, it's going to be able to show this here in this list of information that's coming directly from Jira. And we'll talk about how you can lock stuff down and manage it for your release here in a moment. But we've done things like automating our master document list so that if we have a standard set of documents that we know need to be part of our DHF for release, we can set this up to look for those documents, and when they're created, automatically populate this information in there for them. So I'm going to right now go ahead and let's create our risk management plan. And the other thing that we've done is build out a bunch of templates into Confluence that have the structure for all of our common documentation. So every time we need to do a risk management plan for one of our clients, I can come in here and I can search for risk management. I can see I've got a report template, I've got a plan template, and I'm going to select that and use this template and all the template functionality like filling in variables. A lot of times in some of your plan documentation, you may refer to a particular product or a component name or certain things a bunch of times. We give you a variable so you can fill it in here one time. And it's going to populate that through the whole documentation. And you don't have to worry about manual error or missing one as you're filling out or control Fing the document to change something from one version to another. I'll go ahead and create my page. And what this template does is allow us to build in some of our automatic reporting capabilities, like these document approvals that need to happen at certain milestones. So we don't have to build that out every time that we create a document. And we can pre-fill a lot of the content that needs to be in there. Most of the time we follow a pretty standard risk process and we do some tailoring from project to project. So we can pre-fill a lot of that information and know that we've got a good baseline that follows all of our quality management procedures and practices, and then maybe just do a little bit of customization for a particular product. What we've done to build into all of our templates to make this easy to use and to help eliminate error with our teams is to put instructions right in the template. So that'll take the example of like these little blue or yellow boxes that give you some instructions. So if you're using this template, there's a couple different ways to do it. We like to use the risk management in Jira that we just demoed because it's very great. And there's some nice features that are built in there because it's purpose built for risk management. For example, there's a harm severity lock that's built into the risk manager. So that every time you assign a particular harm across your risk register and you give it a severity, let's say I say this risk could result in acute pain and that's a severity of 3. I have another risk, I say this is acute pain and that's a severity of 2. I'm going to get an alert that I've used 2 different severities for the same harm, so that it's helping me catch some of that error. But now this template's going to come in here and tell me how to use the widgets that we've put into this template in this document to be able to report on our risks right here and not have to manually manage that. So I can come in here and I would follow these instructions that are built into the template to pick the project I want to report on. It's going to be able to get all of that information that was in our project for Jira and put it here into our risk management plan. So I don't have to manage that or update that in multiple places. We can see here, this is an example of our risk matrix with that extreme classification that I put in there. And now I can include this in my plan as my intended risk management matrix style or risk definitions that I'm going to use for my project. And we can see it contains all of our class information, the definitions that we've entered, including my keyboard smash when I created our thing real quick, so that this is going to provide everything you need for your documentation. All I need to do is give my document a name, and then I can publish it, and it's going to be there available to be reviewed. I'd be able to go to my master document list and now see that I've got a risk management plan in place. Auto-populated in here. So here's the one that I just created. I don't have to go back and manually manage my master document list. The other thing that allows us to do our documentation in a compliant way is a couple add-ons. One is from SoftComply and one is from AppFire Kamala. And so Kamala Document Management has a full approval workflow built in that you can apply to your documentation. So a lot of times your DHF documentation might be a relatively simple, review, send it out for approval, you assign the right approvers to it, they approve it, and your documentation is ready to go. But we also use this workflow to manage really complex processes like our CAPAs, for instance, that have a lot of steps that you need to go through with different people that need to approve at different points. And so you can build all of that out into that workflow. So whatever process you need, you can establish your document control processes, your change management processes, who needs to approve what, you can build that out in your workflow, and it's going to do that automatically for you. So if you need to, top management needs to approve any change to a procedure, it's going to automatically assign top management when that procedure is changed. This is part, it's compliant for electronic signatures because you can do this with an authenticated token. So your team has to do a real quick setup with an authenticator, and then they can sign all of these documents. The other piece that's really critical for this is static snapshots from soft comply. And because we've included dynamic content on this from all of these reporting widgets, or because if we look at our risk management plan, we've got some dynamic content in there because we're pulling our risk matrices or our list of risks from Jira. If we make a change in Jira, it would update in this document, which is great for living documentation and doing things iteratively and having your quality team work side by side with your software development team. But when you need to lock it down and sign your documents and release for a filing or create your documentation, you don't want it to change anymore. And so you can come in here and you can use static snapshots to manage snapshots or moment in time versions of that dynamic content. So I can take a snapshot, I could then lock the page with the latest snap, and that version could be what I sign off on. And that dynamic content, I could go in and add a new risk in Jira, and it's not going to show in this version because I've locked that content down. And just to show an example, this is our quality management system. We house all of our quality system records, our SOPs, our work instructions, everything that we need to do to establish our, compliant system. We can do that inside of Confluence using these tools and following through those processes.
Melissa, do you want to show perhaps like what one of the workflows looks like? Maybe the CAPA workflow?
Yeah, let's pull up the CAPA workflow because that one's fun and unique. We even put a picture of it here at the top of our CAPA homepage because there's a lot of steps in that process. But let me go into here into document management. I can zoom in on that a little bit more for you. And so you do have an editor. You can edit in JSON. You can edit it in sort of a WYSIWYG GUI sort of editor and manage out all these intricate steps in your workflow. So as we're going through our CAPA process, we've got approvals that we need to do at certain states. It gets submitted to our CAPA coordinator and they complete some activities to assign the CAPA. We identify and describe the information. We do our planning, we implement, etc. You can even do timeouts where, if you need to implement your CAPA within, 90 days of it being assigned to an implementer, if that doesn't go to the next state in time, you can have it automatically expire, change state, send off notifications so that it's going to help you manage those documents and make sure that you're doing things in a timely manner. And so you have full control to manage this. If I wanted to change something around who needs to do and approve at a certain point in time, I can come in, I can manage this approval. I can specify specific people that need to approve or a specific group. So using a group is a really great way. If you need a certain role to approve something like the CAPA coordinator, instead of assigning the name of the person who's your CAPA coordinator right now, create a user group in Atlassian for Jira and Confluence that is CAPA coordinator and put the CAPA coordinator into that group. And then you can manage permissions or approvals using the group of CAPA coordinator. And if you change who that coordinator is, you change them in one place in your user management, add the new person to the group, take the old person out. You don't have to come back in here and change all of your permissions and your workflows to specify as a new individual.
And then I think there was a question on tools validation as well that we knew would come.
Yes. So tools validation, that's another one of the things that we've got some templates and procedures around. And then you can also do that in terms of managing your protocols in your same test suite that you use for your software, if that works for you. So you could create all of your validation protocols in Jira, in X-Ray, define what those tests are, have a test plan that's your tools validation, and run that when you need, if it's automated or manual. And one of the things that SoftComply offers with their eQMS integration as part of the add-ons is a validation suite. And we use that for ourselves to make sure we had a little bit of that kind of third-party validating these tools for us. They have extremely detailed protocols that they can offer. And so we found that very valuable. That would give us also the ability to continue to run that in the future.
Great. We've got some other questions that come in. I see a couple people have raised their hands. Candidly, I don't know how to respond to a hand raise. So if you could just type your question in the chat window, that would be great. All right, let's start to.
I think I have one that I think was raised, which is that medical device companies think in terms of user needs, requirements, and verification protocols, and Agile works in terms of user stories and acceptance criteria. How do we have these things work together in concert?
I can just start going down some of the list of questions if you'd like.
Yeah, that's you want to start with that one?
Sorry, I was looking at the first one on the list. Which one are you speaking to?
Sorry, I was here. I'll read the question. User needs, software requirements, and verification are prominent in the regulatory world, whereas user stories and acceptance criteria are dominant in the Agile world. How are both worlds connected in your system?
Yes, so that goes back to, let me go back to Jira and the items that we captured in here. So our user needs, software requirements, and verifications are all captured as items in Jira. And so this is just kind of our user needs are in here are for demo purposes, and I don't have content in there, but you would be able to add any descriptions around that you need. You can include things like Lucidchart diagrams or other references and attach that to the Jira ticket. And then that user need lives in Jira. And so that can be exported. So if you wanted to, generate a document that listed all of your user needs, create a document, include a Jira search result, issue type equals user needs type of thing. And then that would report out all of your user needs. And this is using, just kind of built-in Confluence functionality around how those systems integrate and can report off of each other. And so that's kind of how we're bringing that into the Agile world, where we can manage all of that in Jira, in the tools the teams are already using, and using those reporting tools and that integration with Confluence to make reporting on those items very easy.
So then we end up having user needs and then maybe system level requirements in here. And then within the user story, we can write the user story in, we can have a couple of different fields depending on how you want to or need to write things, right?
Yeah.
There's a related question. Sorry.
Shall, language, etc. Those are, the stories can be written in, you can have a couple of different fields in there depending on how that is used as well. In a lot of cases, the verification protocols for software, a lot of these end up being tests that are composed of acceptance tests. Not all verification protocols and not all verification is test driven, but a lot of it is, and we end up composing a lot of the verification protocols out of the different tests that we end up building for user stories or also for system level requirements.
Yeah. Since you can build out test plans or test sets, that basically it's an atomic type system. So you have individual granular tests that you can create in Jira, and then you can start grouping them into sets, right? So if you had a bunch of tests that you need to run around log in and log out, you could have a test set of authentication tests, and then you could have a test plan that would, incorporate what you are planning to run as your formal verifications. You run that test plan, you gather all of the executed results from that, and you can generate the reporting for that verification test plan and all those executions.
So I'll go through a couple other questions. We'll try and keep them related. One person asked, are these templates workflows that Orthogonal uses when developing for virtual manufacturers? Maybe do a snapshot of design transfer, design review for customer DHF. How configurable are they to the virtual manufacturers process? And do you provide these packages for other Jira users?
Do you want to answer the first ones? I can answer that's a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Let's go with the first one, templates. Are these templates we're using, and how does that relate to snapshots for design transfer, design review for customer design history files?
Yes. So depending on how you want to do that, you can either have your customers come in and do approvals in Confluence. There's ways that you can set up, guest users or public spaces to be able to do that. So if one of your documentation, could be like release notes for your end users, you could have that published on a public facing page. And another one of the add-ons we use is Kamala Publishing, which allows you to keep basically 2 separate versions of a document. You can have an in progress one. We use this as well with our eQMS procedures and information. So if we want to make an update to a procedure, we make that change there, or making an update to a document, we can make it. It can go through our full approval process. When it's fully approved, it can then publish out to a separate space. So we've got our, sort of work in progress or our draft eQMS. Go through the whole process. When procedure changes are approved by top management, they get sent out to our area managers to conduct training. And then when all of that training is complete, they can publish out to the final space that the full team has access to as our in effect QMS. You could follow that same type of model for pushing documentation out to your customers. You can also use the export functionality in Confluence. So you can go through your internal approvals. And if you're doing a design transfer, you can export those documents out to PDF or Word format and transfer them that way. So if they're using a different system, or they can ingest external documents like that, that's one way to get it from a Confluence system to a different system.
The other thing that we have done is, in some cases, we have, set up this kind of environment for our customers, so that we can, transfer things more, rather than just documents, more entire systems, and more rich things, so that it can continue to be developed and maintained within this, right? That's always a challenge when you're doing design transfers between different systems. You're mostly, transferring documents if you have 2 different systems on either end. But if they're the same system, you can have a richer process for doing that.
Yeah. And we've done this before for clients where we've done a full export of Confluence and Jira content into their own instance, and that's worked very well for us.
And in terms of, configuring to match a virtual manufacturer's processes, it's definitely, flexible in terms of doing that. What those processes are. Obviously, you saw some of the workflows there. There are a lot of this is very very configurable. We tend to sort of apply particular best practices. We have SOPs and such that are really designed for SAMD. So for how you deal with fast change when you have to make a bug fix because of a cybersecurity vulnerability or something like that. So having processes that allow for fast change when necessary and safe, and sort of the right level of design controls. And then similarly, there are other things that I think, that are best practices here, right? In Agile in general, what you're trying to do is, keep the gates open so you can make changes along the way until you have to close the gates. And for us, that's typically at a point where you're doing formal verification, where you have to close the gates. And so we have in our processes work instructions for what types of documents can live in draft status and when they have to be moved into final close status. That way, as you're developing, you continue to make changes without unnecessary overhead. You have the right level of overhead to do this, but not things where you're just closing it and then you have to open it back up again when you know that you're developing iteratively, you're finding new risks, you are doing all kinds of things that really are means that you want to work in living documentation.
We've got, I apologize by the way, if I'm repeating any questions that have been addressed. These questions are coming in fast and furious and they're good. So I'm trying to synthesize them as we go into buckets. All right, so we've had several about essentially iterative software development, SaMD development and updates. So that's both presumably updates when you're first developing your device and then after you've released your device and you want to do updates to it later on. So people have said, well, how do you do that? And a couple more details in there. One person asks, how do you manage record revisions or records for different software versions? And then there's one more question that I'll wait till we hit those first.
Yeah, so typically for different records revisions, where you need to have, and retain documentation for version 1 and version 1.1, you can use some of the snapshotting tools to create basically a snapshotted copy, as well as, you can generate that documentation again from a template or from existing documentation and then rename it to a particular version. That way it stays as a unique page in Confluence. Each page itself has its own revision or version histories for all of the changes you've made to it. But I wouldn't suggest relying on that for releasing for different versions. You make those copies and retain them as a record for your specific version software.
I think there was a question on integrating software documentation from the code itself. So I think there are some things we are working on with this, right? This is, you can always make improvements, but there are a lot of good things. We typically use GitHub internally, and so there are a lot of tools that can be used there for additional documentation and things that are resident in GitHub, and that can be then integrated back into the documentation. I'm not sure we are. That's in process for us. Those are additional improvements we're making, but I'm not sure I have something where we can tell you this is exactly the right way of doing it. That's still an exploration, but it's a promising one for us.
Yeah. Definitely start with, sorry.
Yeah, go for it. Go.
There's integrations with Jira and Git that you can make sure that you associate a particular story with the branching and as establish development practices so that when someone creates a branch, they're referencing the Jira ticket number, so you have that traceability there as well. Unfortunately, I don't know of any great way of what we've explored yet with that Jira integration to bring like pull request comments back into Jira. But I know there's some pretty robust APIs in both of those systems, and that's some of the future exploration that we're looking to do to continue to make this more agile and more automated.
Excellent. Quick interjection, we are at our original time for the core webinar. So for those of you who joined us and need to jump off, thank you very much. Send in your questions. We welcome your feedback. And we will let you know about future events. For everybody else, don't go anywhere. We've got another at least half an hour to answer questions.
I think there was one question on or a couple of questions on whether a recording of the session will be made available to participants.
Yes, we will have this up on YouTube by the end of the week, and we will actually have more of a written summary of this with more details and slides. It'll come up in the next 2 weeks or so. So definitely, if you want to share it with other people, let us know, or you can pull it down yourself off of our website. All right. One person, I'm sorry if we missed this. Somebody asked about documenting code reviews and other bug fixes.
We
talked about that.
We just talked about that. And I think have you filed documents generated by your tool stack as demoed here for a real product to say FDA? Yes, we have. They've been in both FDA 510K filings. Don't know that we've done, I think 1 or 2 de novos as well, and some EUA stuff as well.
Yeah,
could you also talk, there was a question about client acceptance of this and what's the reaction been from our customers?
Our customers have been, pretty happy with this. If they're doing software, this is, I think it's a question of what kind of tooling they are using. Let's say if they don't have software developers, then and we're doing the software development for them, then it's it's more like, oh, you're getting the outputs faster and it's you're actually able to make this work in an agile fashion. That's great. If, on the other hand, we're helping them with a project that maybe is, where we're helping them set up quality management system, doing agile enablement, etc., then it's a question of really what kind of tooling do they have as well, right? One of the keys here is to not rip out the developer's tooling. But if you're not doing Jira and Confluence now, let's say your developers are all working in some flavor of Azure DevOps, then bringing this solution in is going to be actually ripping out what they do. So that's kind of counterproductive and very difficult to do. So there are, we think that the Jira Confluence environment at this point is pretty advanced and pretty widely accepted among software developers, but it's not the only one. There are other environments and other ways that you can do this. You can apply, I think, obviously similar techniques, but in our experience, there's more work in those. But it may be work that's worth doing. It's the worst thing you can do is totally change the developer's way of working. That's what you want to avoid.
Bernhard, there's a related question that came in, which is, okay, so we don't want to basically rip out all of our developer tooling, but we love the principles and the, the automation around this. Any ballpark estimate of what kind of effort it would be to take another tool and put these kinds of templates and structures in, say, with Azure DevOps?
It's hard to answer without knowing the specific tool.
Yeah, I would say it's
but no less than.
no less than. It's so the problem here then is, are you doing this all for yourself internally to your company, right? In other words, you're building ultimately customizations and custom code, custom software for your own internal QMS, or are you able to leverage commercially available tools and configuration where you are doing what other people are doing, right? So I would say, you could probably build something out in the, team of 4 developers for 6 months. You could really do some damage, but then you're going to continue to be spending time and money on that if it's your internal tooling, right? So or you can wait for the right kind of tooling to become commercially available within the ecosystem that you are in. So
yeah.
We keep looking. We're looking in those other areas as well, because we do have customers that are doing are in those environments, right? And so we're interested in making that happen. We're just not, we started with one, right? And there happened to be, a good ecosystem, and vendors like Soft Comply, and tools like X-Ray and Risk Manager, et cetera, there that we could put together, configure, and apply our processes and methods to.
And I would say if anybody on this webinar sees any instances of other organizations making progress around this, we'd love to hear about it, because it's just these things are way too important for it to just be one great solution out there. This needs to be commodity in a couple of years for all of our sakes. Interesting question really about how does this facilitate cross-functional teams, who primary users, but like, would you have a clinician go in and review and endorse risk severities, or are developers really the primary users, and are they conducting traceability matrices? How do you assign that out or think about that here?
I would say, so ultimately, right, it is, the tool is in service of your processes. So you have to think about those processes. So let's take risk management as kind of its own agile backlog process, right? Someone needs to be the risk manager who is running that process. And you have things where, risk management activity, a backlog of activities, stories that need to be evaluated, risk mitigations evaluated, verification, etc., or early on, coming up with your preliminary hazard analysis and then feeding that into software level of concern and software classification. And so, use the agile rituals and have the right people together to work on that stuff together. The tool can facilitate that where you're all working together within that. And some people, would work offline, but a lot of that happens, when you have the four amigos together working through that. I would say that let's say you have a clinician who's doing clinical risk evaluation, they're probably not a primary user. They're not a pig, they're a chicken in the agile parlance, right? So they may get brought in during a risk management meeting. Risk manager says, we need clinical risk evaluation for this. So, as part of that regular risk review meeting, they're in the meeting, they're brought through, and their feedback is solicited. They may then, if they are an approver on some of these things, get notified for approval for particular within the workflow as well. So that's how a lot of the people that are only tangentially or periodically involved wouldn't be regular users. You might also be able to create specific reports or views for them as well, so they really only see the tasks that they need to work on as well.
Yeah.
Was there anything to add there?
Yeah, I think there's some great points. Like, it's one of those things where, folks who are not part of your software development team are probably not used your software before. And so I wouldn't necessarily just let them free in the backlog or something like that, because they don't want to learn another tool, and that they shouldn't have to, right, to do their job. And so it can be, like Bernhard mentioned, having that regular risk management meeting and having someone from the team, sharing the screen with the risk manager plugin up, and you can review those risks together and make changes right there together with that clinician's input. It's also things like if you want to, bring them into Confluence to review documentation, but not into Jira, or even in Jira, and you can build some specific dashboards for them, right? Build a dashboard that shows you've got a workflow for your risk to have them be an assessment and approved, right? Have a list that reports out to them every risk that is flagged for clinician assessment, and they can go down that list and not touch another screen in Jira.
Excellent. There's a more general question here that I think you sort of answered, but basically somebody says, look, if you're building a QMS, what tools do you recommend using? What combinations of Jira, Monday, ClickUp, Notion, HubSpot, etc.?
Yeah. In this scenario, we were coming from a team that was using Jira and wanted to stay using Jira. And so I think that definitely, was part of our requirements and had us looking more deeply at the tools that are on Jira. I have not really intensely used things like Monday or ClickUp for agile software development or for software as a medical device. To me, those have felt a little bit more kind of traditional project management tools and task management. I've preferred to use Jira at all the places that I've worked that are working in an agile format. Kind of as we spoke to earlier, if your team is already fully invested in and is using tools like Monday or ClickUp, I don't know if this solution, because it is so dependent on Jira functionality, Confluence functionality, and starting with that as the core would necessarily be the right thing for you. But I think there's certainly tools out there and integrations out there to look at, what is the right document management system, or how can you generate things like templates and documents in those tools to work more agilely with your team. I think it would be a little bit more of a research around how do we support some of these things that are built into the add-ons, like Part 11 compliance for signatures, document approval workflows, exporting. Those are the type of things that you'd have to take a look at your tool and see if it's able to meet those without having to rebuild something that exists in another platform, another tool, or what makes sense as an integration for the tools that are out there in the QMS space.
A related question, I think I'll direct to Bernhard, is could you talk a little bit about the different worldviews of some of the eQMS software we looked at? Because I believe some were basically much more, here's the processes, and it's sort of out of a box for you, and some are a little more of a, here's a platform that you can configure your process. How do organizations think about that and when they're doing selection?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of a couple of different worldviews, right? One, there is basically very much of this is document management with approvals, right? Which works well in a waterfall environment where these documents aren't evolving and changing, et cetera, and you're just have phase gates that are closed. Then a new long phase and a new long phase, et cetera, goes through. It's okay in those circumstances. And that's a lot of, frankly, the quality management system tools, the eQMS tools that are out there, use that metaphor, right? I think, we recognized just from our experience that really didn't add value for us and for doing agile software development. It in those circumstances ends up being just a repository for documentation, maybe, if you need to integrate that in with other processes, hardware development, manufacturing, et cetera, if you have those things and not just software. But that you're better off with something where you really have, let's call them application lifecycle management, product lifecycle management kind of tooling. And so there are tools out there that are really more centered around that, where you can customize workflows and you can come up with different atomic structures and working things through. Some of those also have kind of project management tools that are part of that. But they're good at one thing and not good at the other thing, right? Melissa, I think you have a pithy phrase, I think, for how good the project management tooling is in some of those ALM, PLM tools for software.
Yeah. As an agile project manager, I wouldn't want to work in some of those tools where you've got a document management or QMS management system that has tried to fulfill a customer need by saying, like, we can also do ALM or PLM. But it feels a little bit more like a bolt-on as opposed to what they're truly trying to accomplish. I would not want to run a sprint in Polarian. Even though Polarian does great things, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think so. For us, it's sort of like really. So you can then do more, integrating with Jira or some other, Rally or some other kind of, agile project management tool. But then you have it is a brittle, more brittle integration that you're going to be constantly sort of less than perfect, right?
Yeah, you're dealing with those APIs and how often can you run the synchronization and what system are people making changes in and how often and things like that.
So look, there is no, we already know this from many years of software development and software tooling. There is no perfect tool, right? Whatever you're doing, you're going to be making some compromises. It's just, what are the right compromises for you that allow you to get maximum benefit out of the tooling to improve your quality, to streamline your processes, stay compliant, and ultimately improve quality and save time and money, right? So for us, we're still measuring a lot of this, but we're we certainly have improved the quality of our process and repeatability of our processes. And we've I'm looking at it and I'm guessing as we move along, we're going to move up from like 25 to 40+% improvement in in the timeline and the costs for the non-development parts of our process.
So Bernhard, if you think of that as an evolution, right, of moving up the curve on this, do you see a point where you're sort of like, are you in a descriptive reporting phase now? But as you build up this remarkable database of intelligence of how these things have been used in relationships, that we could get into so much more sophisticated quality improvement analysis over time?
Yeah, I think some of that is just sort of, it's a question of defining the right metrics, first of all, and then being able to measure those things, right? Some of the things that, and we've had these discussions internally, some of these things are great to measure, but measuring them is not free, right? And so there are things where we can actually, generate reporting and measurement where we can, where it's sort of measurement that's a byproduct of the process. But there are other ones where we have to, get people to record certain things, which is extra work. So we're working on a few things around that, but I think that's the next thing, right? Ultimately, you're using tooling to improve your processes, so you need to put in the right metrics and then figure out where is your sort of, where are the low-hanging fruit? What are the things you can do for the least amount of effort to get the greatest bang for the buck, and then measure that, and then decide at what point, are you willing to take the next thing, and realize as you go along, some of those things are going to be a lot more effort to squeeze that last bit of productivity out.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. We had talked recently to somebody who's not in the med tech space, but is very deep in sort of agile modern software development. And they've basically built some algorithms, not AI ML, but just some mathematical formulas to look at your GitHub repository and essentially come back to you just based on that analysis of the data in GitHub and the metadata. Here's the dysfunctions of your team. Here's the top impedance mismatches. I can literally tell you where you're having your problems just by looking at the repository. So thinking about adapting that to what we're doing is.
Yeah, I think at scale, one of the things that, again, if you can also, as part of your process, right, think about data collection throughout the product lifecycle, including post-market. There's an awful lot, if you can keep all of this and have this, rich set of data in your system, and you have enough projects that you're doing this on, there's definitely things where you could potentially, use AI, for example, to identify, emergent risks or identify process issues. Those are all great things that right now are but a gleam in Randy Horton's eye, but things move fast in this world.
Oh, I see it in your eye too. All right, we have back to some of the questions we have here. One person said, "Hey, can I do my my compliant AI algorithms in this eQMS?"
Yes, I think the thing you need to think about with AI algorithms, right? You've got sort of two parts to this, right? Ultimately, you're going to end up with a locked, right now at least, right? Everything that the FDA has cleared has been a locked algorithm, maybe with a predefined change control process, although they may be sort of de-emphasizing that. There are some folks that have gotten that. So that is more of a ultimately, you have things that you need to show in terms of your process for generating the AI algorithms, how you got to those algorithms, which is a lot more about data case management, and good machine learning practices, right? So we've done things where mostly we're using other tooling for that part, because that's and then having the locked algorithm as part of the the design history file, right, and the regulatory submission. And the others is sort of ultimately right now still probably not not integrated into this form of document management. But I think eventually we can get there.
To apply these principles to.
You can apply these principles, but there's extra work and other things that you're doing that you need to do here, because it's not really, stories and issues. It is in terms of the, the sausage making of the AI, right? The sausage making of the AI is not software development. It is a different type of process.
Two related questions on cybersecurity. First of all, is your QMS secure, and how do you know? And the second one is, how do you use this tooling to facilitate secure devices that you're developing, secure device software?
So let's see. I think, as with anything, when we're looking at, risk around tools, et cetera, we do cybersecurity risk analysis, and we do appropriate level of risk analysis for that and mitigations for that. So yes, we believe it is secure for based on the things that we have done, but that's a constant effort of as with any tooling that is connected through the internet, right? And in terms of using this for secure software, absolutely. I mean, I think again, part of the process, it's not necessarily the tooling, but as I think Melissa mentioned earlier, we are doing very similar risk management processes for cybersecurity risks, for patient risk, and also use errors type risks. There's other tooling I think we end up using for some of the cybersecurity risk analysis that has additional features that right now I don't think we have as fully integrated as we would like. So it's a question of use those features, but have to do extra integration or or some manual steps and processes in that, which is kind of where we're at right now, or not use those. So it's always like, do you need that extra tooling around that? But yes, ultimately the documentation ends up living within here, but the integration isn't as great yet as I would like, right?
There's a lot of security information that Atlassian provides, and add-ons can also be like, I forget what the exact title is, but they do like a security check and they certify add-ons for security compliance practices and stuff like that. They can help, establish that.
So a couple of questions related to the Atlassian tools. One, I don't know if this is in a respect to Atlassian's reputation for really, really powerful tools, but maybe a less fanatic approach to user interface design. What has been the most challenging aspect of using Atlassian tools you have faced, e.g. in audits?
I mean, we got some very positive comments from the last auditor around the tooling. It was a little bit different than some of the stuff we've seen before. I think probably the challenge is that it is a little bit more agile, a little bit more futuristic than a lot of traditional QMS and regulatory space has tended to be. Because it is a cloud software tooling, and there's still, conversations in there about how do you do validation in a software as a service type of state, right? And it's just a little bit more about, sometimes bringing folks up to the latest thinking on that around how you can use cloud services and have validated tools or validate that environment or demonstrate tooling with that. I know it's interesting because I've worked with someone before who absolutely hated the UX for Jira and refused to use the tool. And he was the owner of the company, so he got to decide what tools the company used. But I've used some of the tools that have made me realize that Jira's interface is not so bad. There was one I looked at that made me feel I was like in a Windows 95 file browser or something. And so, I think there's definitely probably better UX that's possible, and I've also seen worse. So like, I'm not too concerned about like the user interface aspect of it, especially for your teams that are in there every day and are just used to Jira and Confluence's intricacies. Like, it just becomes part of the background.
So I will actually give a personal comment as somebody who's a probably one of the less frequent users of this tool at Orthogonal, who goes in a bit, which is that you probably want to make sure, given that people can get the hang of Jira and these tools, but if you're a less frequent user, probably want a little more support for them because they may not remember from time to time exactly where to click, just some circled screenshots, which I've been provided over time have been very helpful. Another question is basically about the shift in Confluence in terms of Atlassian's product and how it's moving to the cloud and what does that mean? So maybe if somebody could first explain what's happening with Atlassian and Confluence and licensing, and then talk a little bit about how if that plays here.
Yeah, so Jira Server is a product that Atlassian offered for like basically self-hosting or on-prem for the Jira software. And you had a lot more direct control over that. You could configure things you cannot control on Jira Cloud. The add-on suite that we're using is available on Jira Cloud. Not everything is available on Jira Data Center. Not everything is available, kind of back and forth. So it's a little bit of establishing what the tooling is for your appropriate version of the software. But Atlassian is sunsetting Jira Server. I believe support ends for that in like February of next year. But the Jira Data Center product is going to continue to still be available. It's kind of like another evolution of Jira Server. So if you do want to do some on-prem hosting of that, there's an option for that. But a lot of the stuff, especially the more complex or more enterprise-focused stuff, larger at-scale type of stuff, was really focusing on Jira Server for their offerings. For example, requirements management for Jira, which was one of the add-ons we looked at today, had a cloud version that was definitely like, it was the redheaded stepchild of their family for their product support. Their main product was their tooling for Jira Server. And as that is being phased out, they have been migrating more and more features to their cloud products. And a lot of add-on providers have been doing this. So there's some improvements that have happened with R4J even this year that have made it a great tooling option for us with that traceability and the ability to export. Earlier this year, they didn't have the ability to export, and it wasn't a usable tool for us because it's great to build all the traceability you want, but if you can't get it out and have it be part of a submissive package, then it doesn't help you to use that. So I think we are in a place where there's a lot of movement in the add-ons in the marketplace currently because of that switch from Jira Server and because of that historical focus on that as more of your enterprise self-hosting type of customer. But the Jira Data Center product is going to continue to be available for a lot of larger organizations or, pharma type of places will tend to have a little bit different risk on view on risk management and different requirements they have to fit rather than software as a medical device. And so those may be the type of organizations that are a lot larger and will prefer to self-host and manage the software. Jira Data Center is going to continue to be available, but the Jira Server offering, you need to either migrate to cloud or data center.
Yeah, and I think it used to be that Server was the flagship. Things appeared there first. I think that's, it's moving more towards cloud first and then data center in terms of those things, right? So
yeah, I think for a lot of folks, it isn't in the current state of cloud computing and offerings that are out there, it isn't the best option to self-host stuff anymore. And so that's definitely changing.
And people are hosting data center on the cloud anyway, right?
Yeah. Please give me this version of the software, but you host it on your server. I don't want to administer the server, but I would like some more configuration control of how the software runs.
Right. Yep.
Right. I think we're actually winding down the questions, which is good because we've only got 5 minutes left on the core here, and you all may be getting a little tired. The last question is sort of, okay, so what if you're doing different kinds of software in your device? You've got web software, web front end or back end. You've got your cloud back end. You've got your apps, or you even have software inside a physical device. Be it firmware or embedded. How do you put all that together with this? And then that'll be our closing question.
All right. The processes and the tooling is going to work the same way, and then it's just a matter of how you want to best organize that in Jira. You may want to do like each software component is its own project that has its own backlog, that has its own versioning scheme, and you manage that. That's typically the structure I see for when you've got a more complex ecosystem of software products. Each one has its own Jira project and documentation you can generate for that. All of our tooling supports, managing stuff in a bunch of different places. So you could have individual projects for your different software components or your system components, and then you could have a consolidated project that is managing all of the risks across all of the systems. And all of those items, because they're issues in Jira, any item can link to another one. It doesn't have to be in the same project. And any item can be pulled into your reporting and documentation in Confluence, because you can query those items however you need to do to pull them in or to associate them or to generate reports. You can even, it's not something that Jira supports with like their next gen, or I think they call them team managed projects now. But I've worked on complex programs where there were multiple applications and systems where each product or each version component of the software had its own Jira project. And those still even fed into a single overall sprint board that one team was responsible for developing across those different components, or the back end and front end. There's like 2 different iOS applications that were being managed as part of the program. And that could all feed into a singular board, a singular backlog. But if you looked at an individual Jira issue number, one would be, product ABC, and the other one would be DEF. So that gets into more fun, deep detail in how you want to administer your projects in Jira and configurations.